It was a bitterly cold winter night, the kind that seemed to slice right through even the thickest of coats. Snow drifted gently from the dark sky, blanketing the quiet streets in an eerie stillness. Amidst this icy silence, Evelyn stood outside a house that, until just moments ago, she had thought of as her home. The house was dimly lit, its windows fogged up from the warmth inside, a warmth she could feel seeping away from her with every passing second in the harsh cold. She clutched a small worn suitcase in one hand and held her wool scarf tightly against her chest with the other, though it did little to stave off the biting wind that seemed to pierce through her old coat. The door behind her had shut firmly, with a decisive click that echoed in the quiet night. The force of that sound reverberated in Evelyn's heart more than any winter chill ever could. Her own grandchildren, Jake and Rachel, had closed that door, effectively locking her out of their lives and into the freezing night. They hadn't even allowed her to explain. They had grown up right here, in her arms, on her knee. She had raised them, filled their lunches with treats, stayed up late during their fevers, and supported them as they navigated life without parents. Now they had sent her out, as if all those years meant nothing. She hadn't just lost her shelter that night. It felt as if she'd lost her family, the people she'd thought she could rely on, the people she'd loved most in this world. The air was painfully frigid as Evelyn took a few steps away from the door, each step feeling heavier than the last. Her breath turned to mist, her frail figure shaking slightly as she looked down the empty street, illuminated by the occasional street lamp casting its pale yellow glow on the untouched snow. Evelyn's mind raced. She hadn't prepared for this. She had no money, nowhere to go. Just hours before, she had been inside, helping with dinner, tidying up the little things she thought her grandchildren had missed, comforting herself with the belief that she was a help, a support, even if things had been tense lately. As she looked down at her small, nearly empty suitcase, Evelyn felt a mix of despair and a flicker of defiance. She could hear Jake's words echoing in her mind, words that had stung more than he would ever understand. "You're just a burden," he'd said, his voice tired and dismissive, as if she were a stray pet they no longer wished to care for. Rachel hadn't said much, just stood there with her arms crossed, her gaze cold and unreadable. But the silence from her granddaughter had cut even deeper. Evelyn could tell by the look in her eyes that there was no place for her in their lives anymore. Evelyn's mind began to wander as she took hesitant steps down the icy sidewalk. She had never expected this from them. Perhaps, she thought, she had missed some signs along the way. Subtle hints that they wanted her gone. Maybe a glance or a sigh she'd brushed off. But she had always believed that, no matter what, they would stay together, even if times got hard. She'd always believed family was the one thing that would never let you down. Tonight, though, she realized just how much she had been mistaken. It was in the dead silence of the empty street that Evelyn made her decision. She couldn't bear to reach out to friends or neighbors. The thought of them seeing her in this state, knowing her own family had turned her away, was too humiliating. And yet she didn't want to simply resign herself to this fate. Somewhere deep within her, there was a glimmer of resilience, a spark of pride that told her she wouldn't let this define her, even if it broke her heart. She thought of the town's shelter, a place she had never imagined she'd find herself, yet the only place she could turn to now. She had seen others seek refuge there, people she had once pitied, people she had even helped when she could. Now she found herself in their shoes, with nowhere else to go. Pulling her scarf tighter around her neck, Evelyn began the long walk to the shelter. It was a bitterly cold winter night, the kind that seemed to slice right through even the thickest of coats. Snow drifted gently from the dark sky, blanketing the quiet streets in an eerie stillness. Amidst this icy silence, Evelyn stood outside a house that, until just moments ago, she had thought of as her home. The house was dimly lit, its windows fogged up from the warmth inside, a warmth she could feel seeping away from her with every passing second in the harsh cold. She clutched a small worn suitcase in one hand and held her wool scarf tightly against her chest with the other, though it did little to stave off the biting wind that seemed to pierce through her old coat. The door behind her had shut firmly, with a decisive click that echoed in the quiet night. The force of that sound reverberated in Evelyn's heart more than any winter chill ever could. Her own grandchildren, Jake and Rachel, had closed that door, effectively locking her out of their lives and into the freezing night. They hadn't even allowed her to explain. They had grown up right here, in her arms, on her knee. She had raised them, filled their lunches with treats, stayed up late during their fevers, and supported them as they navigated life without parents. Now they had sent her out, as if all those years meant nothing. She hadn't just lost her shelter that night. It felt as if she'd lost her family, the people she'd thought she could rely on, the people she'd loved most in this world. The air was painfully frigid as Evelyn took a few steps away from the door, each step feeling heavier than the last. Her breath turned to mist, her frail figure shaking slightly as she looked down the empty street, illuminated by the occasional street lamp casting its pale yellow glow on the untouched snow. Evelyn's mind raced. She hadn't prepared for this. She had no money, nowhere to go. Just hours before, she had been inside, helping with dinner, tidying up the little things she thought her grandchildren had missed, comforting herself with the belief that she was a help, a support, even if things had been tense lately. As she looked down at her small, nearly empty suitcase, Evelyn felt a mix of despair and a flicker of defiance. She could hear Jake's words echoing in her mind, words that had stung more than he would ever understand. "You're just a burden," he'd said, his voice tired and dismissive, as if she were a stray pet they no longer wished to care for. Rachel hadn't said much, just stood there with her arms crossed, her gaze cold and unreadable. But the silence from her granddaughter had cut even deeper. Evelyn could tell by the look in her eyes that there was no place for her in their lives anymore. Evelyn's mind began to wander as she took hesitant steps down the icy sidewalk. She had never expected this from them. Perhaps, she thought, she had missed some signs along the way, subtle hints that they wanted her gone, maybe a glance or a sigh she'd brushed off. But she had always believed that, no matter what, they would stay together, even if times got hard. She'd always believed family was the one thing that would never let you down. Tonight, though, she realized just how much she had been mistaken. It was in the dead silence of the empty street that Evelyn made her decision. She couldn't bear to reach out to friends or neighbors. The thought of them seeing her in this state, knowing her own family had turned her away, was too humiliating, and yet she didn't want to simply resign herself to this fate. Somewhere deep within her, there was a glimmer of resilience, a spark of pride that told her she wouldn't let this define her, even if it broke her heart. She thought of the town's shelter, a place she had never imagined she'd find herself, yet the only place she could turn to now. She had seen others seek refuge there, people she had once pitied, people she had even helped when she could. Now she found herself in their shoes, with nowhere else to go. Pulling her scarf tighter around her neck, Evelyn began the long walk to the shelter. Her feet sank into the thick snow with each step, and she shivered as the cold wind whipped against her face, making her eyes water. It felt surreal, almost like she was watching someone else's life unfold, someone else's tragedy. But it was real, and it was hers. Her feet sank into the thick snow with each step, and she shivered as the cold wind whipped against her face, making her eyes wish she trudged through the snow-covered streets. Her mind flashed back to memories of her grandchildren as young children. Jake, clinging to her hand as he took his first steps. Rachel, nestling close to her as they read bedtime stories. Those memories felt like they belonged to another life now, a distant dream that had slipped through her fingers. The journey to the shelter was longer and more treacherous than she anticipated. The snow was deep, and her hands and face were beginning to feel numb. Each step seemed harder than the last, but Evelyn kept going, her mind set. It was a strange feeling. This quiet determination she hadn't felt in years. She could almost hear her late husband's voice, urging her on, reminding her of the strength she'd always had inside her. She was still that strong woman, she told herself, even if she'd forgotten it somewhere along the way. After what felt like an eternity, Evelyn finally reached the shelter. The warmth from inside the building was like a balm against the cold that had settled into her bones, and she hesitated for a moment, not wanting to impose but knowing she had no choice. The staff at the shelter greeted her with compassion, offering her a cup of hot tea and a blanket as they helped her settle in. Evelyn was humbled by their kindness, feeling both grateful and a bit ashamed. She had always been the one helping others, and now, for the first time in her life, she was on the receiving end. As she sipped her tea, Evelyn looked around at the other shelter residents, people of all ages, each with their own stories, their own hardships. It was here, in this unexpected place among strangers, that Evelyn found a glimmer of solace. These people knew hardship. They had faced life's harsh realities just as she was now. Despite her heartache, she felt an odd sense of belonging, something she hadn't felt in a long time. Evelyn leaned back in her chair, pulling the blanket tighter around her shoulders as she watched the morning light seep through the grimy shelter windows. The faint, golden glow cast soft shadows on the sleeping figures around her, painting the room with a quiet, almost sacred calm. For a moment, she let herself bask in the warmth, letting it chase away the chill that had settled into her bones the night before. Her mind drifted to the life she had once known, a life filled with laughter, warmth, and most importantly, family. Her husband, a kind and gentle man, had been her anchor. Together, they had built a life rooted in love and resilience, raising their only child with the hope that those values would be passed down through the generations. But fate had other plans. When her daughter passed unexpectedly, Evelyn's world had come crashing down. Her grandchildren, Jake and Rachel, had become her entire world. She had poured every ounce of her love and energy into raising them, into giving them the stability and guidance they had lost with their mother's passing. But as the years wore on, things had begun to change. Jake and Rachel grew up, and the bond that once held them close began to loosen. They had drifted into their own lives, becoming strangers in many ways. Evelyn had felt it. The gradual distancing, the polite but distant conversations, the unspoken desire for space. She had tried to ignore it, to chalk it up to the natural course of life, convincing herself that they still loved her, that they were simply busy with their own lives. But the events of the previous night had shattered that illusion, leaving her with a hollow ache that no amount of warmth or comfort could soothe. A soft rustling broke her thoughts, and she looked over to see the young mother she had noticed the night before. The woman was awake now, gently rocking her baby, who stirred restlessly in her arms. Their eyes met, and the woman offered Evelyn a tired but genuine smile. Evelyn found herself returning it, feeling a strange sense of connection to this stranger. She couldn't help but wonder about her story, what hardships had brought her here, what dreams she had left behind. It was a strange feeling, this empathy, this kinship that transcended age, background, and circumstance. In this place, they were all equals, bound by the shared weight of life's unexpected turns. As the shelter stirred to life, Evelyn found herself observing the people around her with a newfound curiosity. There was a quiet dignity in their movements, a resilience in their eyes that both humbled and inspired her. She saw Charlie, the elderly man she had spoken with the night before, helping a young man with a torn jacket, offering him advice on how to layer his clothes for warmth. Nearby, the volunteer from last night handed out breakfast, simple bowls of oatmeal, accompanied by a soft word or a gentle smile. Each interaction, each small act of kindness, seemed to weave an invisible thread through the room, binding them all together in a tapestry of shared humanity. Evelyn realized, with a pang of shame, that she had once viewed places like this shelter with pity, perhaps even a touch of judgment. She had thought herself above it, safe in her own world, with her own family. But here, among these people, she saw a depth of character, a strength born of survival, that she hadn't encountered in her comfortable life. They had faced struggles she couldn't fathom, yet they greeted each day with a resilience that left her in awe. In the days that followed, Evelyn settled into a quiet routine at the shelter. She spent her mornings helping with small tasks, folding blankets, tidying up, doing whatever she could to contribute. It was strange, almost surreal, to find herself here, performing these menial tasks, but there was a strange satisfaction in it, a sense of purpose she hadn't felt in years. She found herself forming connections with the people around her. Charlie, who had a knack for telling stories that made everyone laugh. The young mother, Sarah, who shared her worries and fears about raising a child in such difficult circumstances, and even the volunteers, who treated her with a respect that her own family had denied her. One chilly afternoon, as Evelyn sat by the shelter's small, frosted window, watching the world pass by outside, she noticed a familiar figure walking down the street. Her heart skipped a beat. It was Jake. He hadn't noticed her, his head buried in his phone, his expression indifferent as he passed by without a second glance. For a brief, painful moment, Evelyn considered calling out to him, waving him down, hoping that perhaps, just maybe, he would see her, recognize her, and feel the weight of what he had done. But something held her back, a quiet strength she hadn't realized she possessed. She watched him disappear down the street, her heart heavy but resolved. She knew, deep down, that she couldn't go back to that life, couldn't force herself into a place where she wasn't wanted. The shelter had become her home, a place where she was valued not for what she could give, but simply for who she was. It was a humbling realization, one that filled her with both sorrow and a strange, quiet joy. One evening, as she sat with Charlie and Sarah, sharing stories and laughter, Evelyn felt a sense of peace settle over her. She had found something here, something precious and irreplaceable, a community, a family of sorts, bound not by blood but by choice, by kindness, by the simple act of being there for one another. She realized that family wasn't just the people you were born with. It was the people who stood by you when times got tough, who shared in your struggles and lifted you up when you needed it most. As the months passed, Evelyn's presence at the shelter became a comforting constant. She became known for her kindness, her quiet strength, her willingness to listen and offer a comforting word. She found herself thriving in ways she hadn't imagined, her life filled with purpose and meaning once again. Her story spread, becoming something of a legend among the shelter residents, a tale of resilience, of finding family in the most unexpected places. Then, one day, something remarkable happened. A letter arrived for Evelyn, delivered by one of the volunteers with a puzzled expression. It was from Rachel, her granddaughter. The letter was brief, an apology of sorts, filled with words of regret and a plea for forgiveness. But Evelyn could sense the hesitation in the words, the unspoken fear of facing the consequences of their actions. She felt a pang of longing, a flicker of hope that perhaps, one day, they might truly understand the pain they had caused. Evelyn took a deep breath, folding the letter carefully and placing it in her pocket. She knew she couldn't go back to the life she had left behind, couldn't force herself into a family that had abandoned her. But she also knew that forgiveness was a gift she could give herself, a way to free herself from the weight of the past. She decided, quietly and with a sense of peace, that she would continue to live her life here, among the people who had become her true family. She would forgive, but she would also move forward, carrying with her the lessons she had learned, the strength she had discovered, and the love she had found in the most unexpected of places. Ader. It felt surreal, almost like she was watching someone else's life unfold, someone else's tragedy. But it was real, and it was hers. The winter days grew shorter, yet the shelter had become a small world of warmth and resilience for Evelyn. Each morning, as the sun rose sluggishly over the snow-blanketed streets, Evelyn would find herself lost in a quiet rhythm. The shelter had routines, small but meaningful tasks that gave each day a structure, a sense of purpose. For Evelyn, that was something she hadn't felt in years. Every morning, she'd help the staff prepare a modest breakfast, then settle in with the others to tidy up, fold blankets, and share stories. In this place, among people who had weathered their own storms, she felt, strangely, at home. One morning, as she was pouring coffee for the shelter's residents, Evelyn noticed Sarah, the young mother, looking troubled. Sarah sat alone at the corner table, cradling her baby and staring into the distance, her face etched with worry. The lines around her eyes were deeper, her shoulders hunched as if weighed down by invisible burdens. Evelyn's heart ached for her. She had become close to Sarah over the past weeks, drawn to her strength, her fierce love for her child, and the quiet hope that seemed to burn within her even on the darkest days. Evelyn approached her, placing a gentle hand on Sarah's shoulder. "Is everything all right, dear?" she asked softly, her voice filled with the warmth of genuine concern. Sarah looked up, her eyes glassy with unshed tears. She hesitated, then spoke in a hushed voice. I got a notice," she whispered, pulling a crumpled letter from her pocket. "They're saying I need to find a new place soon. I don't know what to do." Her voice trembled, and she clutched her baby closer, as if afraid that he, too, could be taken from her. Evelyn's heart sank. She knew the harsh realities of the shelter all too well. The fact that space was limited, that people came and went as circumstances allowed. But seeing the fear in Sarah's eyes, the sheer desperation of a mother facing the unknown, stirred something deep within her. In that moment, Evelyn felt an overwhelming sense of purpose. She reached out, wrapping her arms around Sarah, offering the simple comfort of a shared struggle. "We'll find a way," Evelyn whispered, her voice steady. "You're not alone in this. We'll figure it out together." Over the next few days, Evelyn threw herself into helping Sarah find resources, calling around to different shelters, looking into programs that could assist young mothers. She even reached out to a few former acquaintances, people who might be able to help, despite the embarrassment she felt at admitting her own situation. Yet, she discovered something remarkable. Many people, upon hearing her story, responded with kindness, offering assistance and advice. It was as though her journey had unlocked a strength she hadn't known she possessed, a willingness to step outside her own needs to help those around her. As Evelyn continued her efforts, word of her kindness and determination spread among the shelter residents and staff. She became known not only for her resilience, but for her compassion, her willingness to lift others even as she faced her own challenges. People began to seek her out, sharing their stories, their burdens, drawn to the quiet strength that radiated from her. In helping others, Evelyn found herself healing, her heart mending in ways she hadn't thought possible. One evening, as she was sitting with Charlie and Sarah by the shelter's small worn fireplace, a volunteer approached her, his expression serious but kind. He introduced himself as David, one of the senior staff members, and thanked her for the impact she had made on the residents. "You've been a blessing here, Evelyn," he said, his voice warm. "I know it's not the same as a real home, but you've made this shelter a better place for everyone." Evelyn felt a warmth spread through her, a quiet joy that filled the empty spaces her family had left. She looked around at the people who had become her true family. Charlie, with his gentle humor and unwavering support. Sarah, with her fierce determination and love for her child. The volunteers who treated her with respect and kindness. She realized that for the first time in years, she felt whole, as though the pieces of her heart had found their way back together, not through blood but through shared humanity. As spring began to creep into the city, melting the last traces of snow, Evelyn's life took another unexpected turn. A letter arrived for her at the shelter, this time not from her family, but from a lawyer representing an anonymous benefactor. The letter stated that someone had heard her story, had been touched by her resilience and kindness, and wished to support her and her new friends in their time of need. The benefactor, who had chosen to remain anonymous, had arranged for a generous donation to the shelter, enough to provide additional resources, help residents transition to stable housing, and even fund a small, community-led program to support elderly individuals at risk of homelessness. The shelter staff and residents were astounded. The news spread like wildfire, filling the air with a buzz of excitement and hope. For Evelyn, the news felt surreal, almost like a dream. She had come to this place with nothing. expecting only a cold bed and a hot meal, and now she had become part of something larger, something that had the potential to change lives. The shelter was no longer just a temporary refuge. It was a lifeline, a community, and Evelyn had played a part in making it so. Over the next few months, Evelyn worked closely with the shelter staff, helping to organize the new programs, reaching out to local organizations, and even mentoring some of the residents who were struggling to rebuild their lives. She became a quiet force within the community, her once empty days now filled with purpose and meaning. She was no longer just an old woman discarded by her family. She was a leader, a friend, a source of inspiration for others who had lost their way. Then one day, she received a visit from Rachel, her granddaughter. It was an encounter Evelyn had both dreaded and longed for, a meeting that held the weight of unresolved pain and unspoken words. Rachel entered the shelter hesitantly, her face pale and drawn, her eyes filled with regret. She looked around, taking in the sight of her grandmother surrounded by friends, by people who had become her family. And she seemed to realize, in that moment, the magnitude of what she had lost. "Grandma," Rachel whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "I'm so sorry. I didn't realize. I didn't understand. Please, can we talk?" Evelyn looked at her granddaughter, her heart aching with both love and pain. She could see the remorse in Rachel's eyes, the guilt and sorrow that only time and understanding could heal. She took a deep breath, steadying herself, and then reached out, taking Rachel's hands in her own. "We can talk," she said softly, her voice filled with a strength that surprised even her. "But understand this, Rachel. I've built a life here, a family. I don't know if I can go back to what we had before. Trust is something that must be earned. And forgiveness is a gift, one I'm willing to give. But things will never be the same." Rachel nodded, tears streaming down her face, and they sat together, sharing a silence filled with both sorrow and hope. In that moment, Evelyn knew that she had come full circle, that she had found her place in the world, not in the family she had once clung to, but in the community she had helped build, in the lives she had touched. The encounter with Rachel left Evelyn with a sense of closure, a feeling of peace that settled over her like a warm embrace. She had forgiven, not just her family but herself, for the mistakes of the past, for the pain she had carried. She had found a new purpose, a new family, and she knew, deep down, that she was exactly where she was meant to be. As she sat by the shelter's fireplace that evening, surrounded by her friends, her family of choice, Evelyn felt a deep, abiding joy. She had been cast out, left to face the cold alone, but she had emerged stronger, braver, filled with a love that no amount of hardship could take from her. She had turned her pain into purpose, her loss into hope, and in doing so, she had transformed not only her life, but the lives of everyone around her. Spring had fully bloomed, bringing with it a sense of renewal that mirrored Evelyn's journey. The air was warmer, carrying the scent of budding flowers, and the once bleak streets now bustled with life. The shelter, too, was transformed, alive with purpose and newfound hope. Thanks to the anonymous benefactor's generous donation, it had become more than a temporary refuge. It was now a vibrant community center, offering workshops, support groups, and resources for those seeking a fresh start. Evelyn watched all of this unfold with quiet pride, knowing she had played a part in the shelter's evolution. Evelyn's role had shifted over these months. No longer merely a resident, she was now something of an elder figure, a mentor to those who walked through the shelter's doors in search of help. She became a beacon for those who had been broken by life's trials, embodying the quiet resilience that inspired them. Her own pain had transformed into a profound compassion, a strength that was evident in every word she spoke, in every act of kindness she extended. She had learned to turn her past into a wellspring of empathy, drawing on her own hardships to understand and uplift others. One day, Evelyn was approached by David, the senior staff member who had first thanked her for her impact on the shelter. He held a stack of papers and wore a warm but serious expression. "Evelyn, I know this might be unexpected," he began, his voice tinged with admiration. "But we'd like to offer you an official role here. We'd like you to oversee our new mentorship program for women and elderly residents. You've done so much for everyone already, and I think you could make a real difference as part of our team." Evelyn was stunned. She looked down at the papers in his hands, a mixture of disbelief and gratitude washing over her. She had never imagined herself in a formal role, especially at this stage in her life. Yet, as she considered his offer, she felt a deep sense of purpose settle within her. This was her chance to give back in a way she hadn't thought possible, to transform her pain into a path for others to follow. "Thank you, David," she replied, her voice filled with quiet conviction. "I'd be honored. I think this is exactly where I'm meant to be." With this new role came new responsibilities, and Evelyn embraced each one with dedication. She led weekly support groups, sharing her story with others who had faced betrayal, loss, or homelessness. Her words were simple, yet profound, resonating with those who were struggling to find hope. She spent hours listening to residents' stories, offering gentle guidance, encouraging them to believe in their own worth. She met young mothers, elderly men who had been forgotten by their families, and veterans haunted by past traumas. Each story reminded her of her own journey, of the night she had been left in the cold and the path that had led her here. One afternoon, as Evelyn was leading a workshop on resilience, a familiar face appeared in the doorway. Rachel, her granddaughter. She looked hesitant, almost shy, as if uncertain of her place in this new chapter of Evelyn's life. There was a vulnerability in her gaze, a silent plea for understanding that tugged at Evelyn's heart. She paused, signaling to the group that they would take a short break, and walked over to where Rachel stood. "Rachel," Evelyn said softly, her voice steady but warm. "I wasn't expecting to see you here." Rachel's eyes filled with tears, and she took a shaky breath before speaking. "Grandma, I didn't know who else to turn to," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "Things have fallen apart since that night. Jake's moved out, and I've been struggling. I didn't realize, I didn't understand what I'd done until it was too late." Evelyn listened, her heart both aching and hopeful. She could see the pain in Rachel's eyes, the regret that had clearly worn her down. It would have been easy to turn her away, to hold on to the bitterness and hurt, but Evelyn had come too far for that. She had learned that forgiveness, while difficult, was a gift that freed both the giver and the receiver. Taking Rachel's hands in hers, Evelyn spoke gently. "I forgive you, Rachel, but understand this. I have built a new life here, one filled with people who care for me, who value me. If you want to be a part of my life, you'll have to earn that place back. I can't simply go back to what we had before." Rachel nodded, tears slipping down her cheeks as she squeezed Evelyn's hands. "I understand, Grandma. I just want to make things right, to be the kind of family you deserve." In the weeks that followed, Rachel became a frequent visitor at the shelter, volunteering alongside Evelyn, observing her grandmother in this new role. She witnessed firsthand the respect Evelyn commanded, the lives she had touched, the quiet strength that radiated from her. It was a humbling experience, one that allowed Rachel to truly understand the magnitude of her actions and the grace with which her grandmother had risen above them. Through Rachel's visits, Evelyn saw glimpses of the love they had once shared, the bond that had been fractured but not entirely broken. Slowly, they began to rebuild their relationship, not as it was before, but as something new, something forged through understanding and forgiveness. Evelyn could see the growth in Rachel, the shift in her perspective, and it filled her with a quiet joy. One evening, as they sat together after a long day of volunteering, Rachel turned to Evelyn, a soft smile playing on her lips. "I've been thinking, Grandma, maybe I could help more, not just here, but with your mentorship program. I've learned so much from watching you, and I think I could really make a difference." Evelyn's heart swelled with pride. She reached over, placing a hand on Rachel's. "That would mean the world to me, Rachel. There's so much you can offer, So much you can learn here. I think this place could use someone like you." Together, they threw themselves into the work, side by side. 2 generations united by a shared purpose. For Evelyn, it was a beautiful irony that she had lost her family, only to find them again in a way she never expected. The shelter had not only given her a new life, but it had also brought her family back to her, healed and whole. Months passed, and the shelter continued to thrive, expanding its reach, becoming a beacon of hope in the community. Evelyn's program for elderly residents grew in popularity, drawing attention from local organizations and charities. She was even invited to speak at community events, sharing her story, inspiring others with her journey from abandonment to purpose. Her words carried weight, touching the hearts of those who heard them, resonating with anyone who had ever felt lost, discarded, or forgotten. One afternoon, as Evelyn stood before a group of volunteers, she shared a final thought that had come to define her journey. Life has a way of breaking us down, of taking things from us that we thought we could never live without. But in those moments, when we feel the most alone, the most betrayed, that's when we find our true strength. Family isn't always the people we're born to. Sometimes, it's the people who stand by us when the rest of the world turns away. Her words lingered in the air, filling the room with a quiet reverence. The volunteers and residents watched her with admiration, recognizing the truth in her story, the resilience that had carried her through her darkest hours. Evelyn had become a symbol of hope, a reminder that even the coldest winter nights could give way to the warmth of spring. And so, Evelyn's life continued, filled with purpose, surrounded by the family she had chosen and the family she had regained. Her heart was whole once more, not because of what she had lost, but because of what she had found. In her journey, she had discovered the strength to forgive, the courage to rebuild, and the wisdom to understand that love, once found, could never truly be lost. In the quiet moments, as she sat by the shelter's window watching the sun set over the city, Evelyn would reflect on the path that had led her here. She knew she had been forever changed, and she was grateful for the hardships, for the unexpected blessings, for the life she had created from the ashes of what once was. She had found her place, her purpose, and it was enough. As the seasons changed once more, with autumn's rich colors sweeping over the city, Evelyn found herself reflecting on how deeply her life had transformed. The shelter had evolved from a place of temporary refuge into a sanctuary filled with purpose, and it was all thanks to the community she had helped build and nurture. Evelyn's story had inspired so many people. Local businesses donated regularly, volunteers poured in to help, and the shelter became a well-known haven in the city. People spoke of it with pride, seeing it as a symbol of resilience and compassion, a beacon of hope where strangers could become family. One afternoon, as she organized a small gathering for new residents, Evelyn noticed a young woman standing hesitantly by the door. She had the nervous, distant look of someone who had just lost her footing in life. Evelyn recognized that expression. It was the same one she'd worn herself not too long ago. She approached the woman with a gentle smile, offering her a cup of tea and a reassuring nod. "Welcome," Evelyn said, her voice warm and soothing. "I know things must feel heavy right now, but you're safe here. We're all here to support one another." The woman's eyes filled with tears as she took the tea, managing a weak but grateful smile. "Thank you. I've just been through so much. I didn't know where to turn," she whispered, clutching the cup tightly. Evelyn guided her to a seat, sitting beside her, and listened as she shared her story, a tale of heartbreak, betrayal, and loss. As the woman spoke, Evelyn offered gentle words of encouragement, drawing on her own journey to remind her that even in the darkest times, there was still hope, still a way forward. Word of Evelyn's mentorship program had spread, and she was now known throughout the city as a figure of resilience and wisdom. She found herself busier than ever, helping the shelter organize resources for elderly residents, counseling young mothers, and supporting veterans who had returned home to find themselves strangers in their own lives. Each day, Evelyn poured her heart into the work, finding strength in every life she touched. Her energy seemed boundless, her spirit unbreakable. It was as if, by helping others rebuild their lives, she was piecing together parts of herself that she hadn't even realized were missing. The shelter staff marveled at her commitment. David, the senior staff member who had first offered her a formal role, often remarked that Evelyn had brought a unique warmth and purpose to the shelter, transforming it from a simple haven to a thriving, nurturing community. "You know, Evelyn," he told her one afternoon as they worked together on organizing donations, "you've done more for this place than any funding or program ever could. You've given it heart. People come here and feel seen, valued, because of you." Evelyn's heart swelled at his words, yet she remained humble. She knew that everything she had accomplished was a result of the hardships she had endured, the lessons she had learned from her own struggles. She had once thought herself broken, discarded by those she loved most, but now she saw herself as part of something much larger than her own pain. Her experiences had taught her empathy, patience, and an unshakable belief in the resilience of the human spirit. One crisp, cool evening, as Evelyn was preparing to leave the shelter for the night, she was surprised to see a small crowd gathering outside. Curious, she stepped out to find the shelter's residents, staff, and even some community members gathered with candles in hand, forming a glowing circle around the entrance. David approached her, holding a bouquet of flowers, his face illuminated by the warm glow of the candles. "We wanted to do something special for you, Evelyn," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "To thank you for everything you've done. You've been more than a mentor, more than a friend. You've been a light for all of us." Evelyn looked around, overwhelmed, her eyes misting as she took in the faces of those she had come to love, each one touched in some way by her kindness. Sarah, the young mother she had comforted months ago, stood with her baby now a bit older, smiling softly. Charlie, the elderly veteran who had first welcomed her, gave her a proud nod. Rachel was there too, standing with the volunteers, her eyes filled with admiration and love for the grandmother who had taught her the true meaning of family. David cleared his throat, lifting his voice to address the crowd. "Tonight, we want to honor Evelyn, not just for the countless hours she's devoted to us, but for showing us all what it means to have courage, to forgive, and to love unconditionally. Evelyn, you are a part of our family, and this shelter wouldn't be what it is today without you." A cheer went up from the crowd, and they raised their candles high, their faces glowing with gratitude. Evelyn felt a warmth spread through her, one that went beyond the simple comfort of friendship. This was her family, the people who had filled the empty spaces in her heart, who had taught her that love was not limited by blood or tradition, but by the simple acts of kindness and compassion. She had given them hope, but they had given her something far greater, a place to belong, a purpose that transcended anything she had ever known. In that moment, as she looked around at the faces illuminated by the gentle flickering light, Evelyn realized that this was what true family looked like. It wasn't bound by names or titles. It was bound by shared hardship, by mutual respect, by the choice to stand by one another through life's storms. She had once been cast out, left to face the cold alone, but here she had found warmth, acceptance, and an enduring love that could weather any trial. As the crowd dispersed, Rachel approached her, her face reflecting both pride and humility. "Grandma, I don't have the words to tell you how much you've taught me," she said softly, reaching out to take Evelyn's hands. "I thought I understood family, but you've shown me that it's so much more than I ever imagined. I'm so grateful, not just for your forgiveness, but for everything you've given to all of us." Evelyn smiled, her heart swelling with joy and gratitude. She placed a gentle hand on Rachel's cheek, her voice filled with the wisdom that had come from her journey. "Family isn't something we're given, Rachel. It's something we create. And it's not always easy, but it's always worth it. We've both learned that now, haven't we?" They stood together in the quiet of the evening, the glow of the candles still flickering in the night, a symbol of the warmth they had found in each other and in the community around them. Evelyn knew that her journey was far from over. She still had so much to give, so many lives to touch, and she was ready to embrace whatever the future held. In the days that followed, Evelyn continued her work at the shelter, but something had shifted within her. She felt a deeper peace, a sense of fulfillment that went beyond anything she had ever known. She was no longer driven by the need to prove herself, to earn a place in anyone's life. She knew she belonged here, not because of what she could offer, but because of the love and respect she had found in those around her. She had built a family, one forged in compassion and resilience, and it was stronger than anything life could throw at her. One morning, as she sat by the shelter's window, watching the sun rise over the city, she thought back to that fateful winter night, to the moment she had been cast out and left to fend for herself. She remembered the pain, the betrayal, the despair that had filled her heart, and she realized just how far she had come. That night had broken her, yes, but it had also set her free. It had led her to a place of purpose, of belonging, and she was grateful for every twist and turn, every hardship that had brought her to this moment. With a quiet smile, Evelyn rose from her seat, ready to face the day. She was not just a survivor. She was a builder, a nurturer, a friend. And she knew that, whatever came next, she would face it with the same strength and courage that had carried her through her darkest days. She had found her place in the world, a place of warmth and love, and she knew, with unwavering certainty, that she was exactly where she was meant to be. As time moved on, Evelyn's story became something of a legend within the community. People from all walks of life came to the shelter, drawn by the tales of the kind, resilient woman who had transformed her own suffering into a lifeline for others. Newspapers covered the shelter's success, and community leaders came by to see how they could help, inspired by Evelyn's unwavering compassion and strength. Through all of this, Evelyn remained humble, continuing her work quietly, as though unaware of the profound impact she had made. One evening, a reporter from the city's largest newspaper arrived to interview her. Evelyn, always modest, hesitated at first. But as she looked around at the shelter, bustling with volunteers and residents working side by side, she realized that sharing her story was no longer about herself. It was about giving voice to the struggles and triumphs of everyone who had walked through the shelter's doors. With this in mind, she agreed, hoping that her story might inspire others to find compassion and understanding for those who had lost their way. The interview took place in the shelter's small common room, and as the reporter asked her about the night she had been left in the cold, Evelyn spoke with quiet honesty. She recounted the feeling of abandonment, the sting of betrayal, but also the unexpected kindness she had found in the people who welcomed her into their lives. She spoke of Charlie, Sarah, David, and even Rachel, each one a vital part of her journey from despair to purpose. As she spoke, she saw the reporter's eyes glisten with tears, and Evelyn realized that her story had touched yet another soul. When the article was published, it spread like wildfire, reaching far beyond the city. People from neighboring towns, inspired by Evelyn's resilience, began donating to the shelter, sending letters of encouragement, and even traveling to volunteer. Evelyn received countless letters, each one sharing the story of struggle or redemption, thanking her for being a beacon of hope. Some letters were from elderly people who had felt forgotten, others from families who had reconciled after reading her story. Each letter was a reminder of the impact one life could have, and Evelyn kept every single one, treasuring them as symbols of the invisible thread of humanity that connected them all. One afternoon, as Evelyn was sorting through a box of donations, she found an envelope with her name on it. Inside was a letter and a photograph. The letter was from her former neighbor, Mrs. Johnson, who had seen Evelyn the night she'd been cast out, shivering in the cold. She had wanted to offer her help, but had been too afraid, too uncertain. The letter was filled with regret, with Mrs. Johnson expressing how deeply she had wished to turn back the clock, to open her door and offer Evelyn the warmth of her home. Evelyn smiled as she read, feeling no bitterness, only compassion. She understood the hesitation, the fear of getting involved. She had once felt the same way, a lifetime ago. She wrote a reply, thanking Mrs. Johnson for her honesty and encouraging her to reach out to others in need, to let go of her regret by transforming it into action. Evelyn's journey had taught her that forgiveness, both for oneself and others, was the first step toward healing. As winter approached once more, Evelyn noticed a change in the shelter's residents. There was a camaraderie, a quiet strength that permeated the place, as though her own resilience had seeped into the walls, touching everyone who passed through. People no longer arrived at the shelter in fear. They came with hope, knowing they would be met with warmth, understanding, and the unwavering support of a family that cared for them, regardless of their past. One evening, Evelyn sat with Charlie, Sarah, and David by the fire, the glow casting soft shadows on their faces. They reminisced about the early days, about the challenges they had faced, and the triumphs they had shared. It felt surreal, sitting there in the warmth of the shelter, surrounded by the people who had become her family. Evelyn couldn't help but feel grateful, not only for the friendship she had forged, but for the strength she had discovered within herself. She had faced the storm, and in doing so, she had found a peace that was deeper and more profound than anything she had ever known. As they talked, Rachel entered the room, holding a small notebook. She smiled at her grandmother, her eyes filled with a deep respect and admiration that had grown over the months they had spent rebuilding their relationship. She sat beside Evelyn, placing the notebook in her hands. "I've been keeping a journal, Grandma," Rachel said softly. "I've written down everything I've learned from you, from the people here, from this journey. I wanted you to have it." Evelyn's hands trembled slightly as she opened the notebook, flipping through pages filled with Rachel's neat handwriting. Each entry was a testament to Rachel's growth, to the lessons she had absorbed, to the love and gratitude that had blossomed between them. Evelyn felt tears prick her eyes as she read, moved by the realization that her story, her life, had not only touched strangers but had brought her family back to her in a way she hadn't thought possible. "Thank you, Rachel," Evelyn whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "You have no idea how much this means to me." Rachel took her grandmother's hand, squeezing it gently. "No, Grandma. Thank you. I'm the one who needed you to show me what family truly is, what love truly means. I didn't understand it before, but now I do." In that quiet moment, Evelyn knew that her journey had come full circle. She had lost everything, only to find something far richer, far more lasting than she could have ever imagined. She had become a source of hope, a symbol of resilience, not only for the shelter's residents, but for her own family. She had turned pain into purpose, betrayal into love, and in doing so, had transformed her life into something beautiful and profound. The winter chill arrived, but this time, it didn't bring with it a sense of loneliness or fear. The shelter was bustling with activity, filled with laughter and warmth as volunteers decorated for the holiday season. Evelyn stood by the window, watching the snow drift down gently, coating the streets in a blanket of white. The world outside was cold, but within these walls, she had found a warmth that no winter could touch. As the holiday season drew near, the shelter held a gathering, a celebration of everything they had achieved together. People from the community came, bringing food, decorations, and gifts for the residents. Evelyn watched as the shelter filled with laughter and joy, the air buzzing with the energy of people united by compassion and hope. There was no talk of hardship or loss that night, only stories of resilience, gratitude, and love. At one point, David called for everyone's attention, his voice carrying through the room. "Tonight, we want to honor someone who has given so much to each and every one of us," he began, gesturing for Evelyn to join him at the front of the room. She blushed, caught off guard by the applause that filled the space as she stepped forward. David placed a small wrapped box in her hands. "Evelyn, you've taught us all the true meaning of family, of love and resilience. You've shown us that no matter how dark life gets, there's always a way forward, always a light to be found. This is just a small token of our gratitude." Evelyn opened the box, revealing the delicate pendant, a small silver heart, engraved with the words, "Family is where the heart finds its home." She looked up, her eyes shining with tears, overwhelmed by the love and gratitude that surrounded her. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice breaking slightly. I don't know what to say. You all have given me more than I could ever repay. You've shown me that family isn't just blood. It's the people who stand by you, who lift you up, who make you feel seen and loved." The room erupted in applause, and Evelyn felt herself enveloped by her community, each person a thread in the tapestry of her new life. She had found a family here, one built on kindness, resilience, and the simple, profound act of caring for one another. As the night drew to a close, Evelyn slipped away from the crowd, finding a quiet spot by the window. She looked out at the city, its lights twinkling against the dark sky, and felt a deep, abiding peace settle over her. She had come to this shelter with nothing, only to find a richness that could never be taken away. She had turned her pain into love, her loss into belonging, and in doing so, had become a beacon of hope for those who had lost their way. In the stillness of the night, Evelyn whispered a quiet prayer of gratitude, not just for the family she had lost, but for the family she had found. She was home, and in that knowledge, she found a joy that was as vast and unbreakable as the stars shining above.